All right. All right.
First of all, what are we looking at? This is real notes or notes you made up for the show?
No, these are the client's real notes. Um, I figured that would be an interesting way to start. Most
Yes,
people
it
do get
is.
their notes, and luckily I still had these available to me. So I figured why not start up with it and go in. As you can see, I can't zoom in on this at this moment. It would
Right.
probably not be legible anyway, but they wanted some extension of the dress,
Mm-hmm.
just basic cleanup around the arms,
Is that what the
clean up
little
in the
dots
teeth.
signify?
That's it, yeah. Bags under the eyes. They want to add in a bunch of hair. She wasn't really showing that she was in the wind all that much, aside from the dress in the back.
I wondered what the dreadlocks are all about.
Yeah, and then just basic cleanup on the motorcycle, and they want to make the entire leg smaller. They figured that even though she was a kind of a petite girl, just the way she was sitting on there, just
Yeah.
it presses out the meat of the muscles, and it just makes her look bigger than otherwise would happen.
Now
So
this was what, for the motorcycle or for the makeup, or what was the aim at this?
this is actually a beauty shot. This was
Okay.
for makeup, for a health shot. Luckily, they did send me various images to go from, and just let this catch up. And
I thought that was cut out, but that's that way in the raw file.
nope, that is that way in the raw file. It was a very shot for a very blown out background, and this particular image was what they wanted for the base, and they supplied some various outtakes to see if I could possibly use any of the any of the pieces to help out with the hair and the dress.
They like little bits and pieces and wanted you to kind of composite them together.
Well, this particular photographer has obviously shot before with and had to have stuff retouched, and so was kind enough to shoot some various stuff just in case it was needed. And I don't know if it was the photographer, or it might have been the creative director, but whomever it was nice of them to have thought ahead that far, because it really doesn't happen that frequently.
Yeah, these
So,
are 8-bit files, or you've
well,
just
these
got
right
that.
now are the raw files. I haven't done anything. Normally, I would set up. This is how I would release out of
Yeah,
camera raw.
yeah, that's going to be a little resource intensive for us, but everybody can note that we're going to be working a little bit shallower than that just for the show. But that's how you would normally do it.
Right. Normally, this is exactly what I would output and work on the 16-bit in Pro Photo. So I would go through and process those down to what I know I would need.
Don't really need
And
any adjustments in camera raw.
I tend to not do too much except for flattening out images. As if you could see here, this is just a JPEG marked up. It's a little flat. The shadow is quite open, and well, the white is pure white. I wasn't going to beef that up any, but I just kept it enough to keep some of the edges on the clear glass that was on the motorcycle itself. So so I got through with all that, and it went well. And this is the result of that here. On the left is what I had given them with before they decided they want to push this dress over. And on the right is where I had added in, they want to hold what I had done with the hair, they want extra hair, and then go back to the way the dress was before.
So this is like what your first iteration, you did a little bit of work on it and sent it back to them?
Yes. And this is what their follow-up comments were. They wanted to still cut the half down and resize the foot and change the cropping on it, so other additional stuff needed to be done. But it's mostly very minor stuff, which I was quite happy with because of the amount of work that actually did go into this, to making her her elbow and knee separate, and actually reshaping them and resizing them down. It's because of the motorcycle behind it. It's definitely a work in progress at that point in time. So we had gotten here. This is back to the file now as it came out of Camera Raw before anything is done. And as we can see from the layer palette on the right, I've got quite a few layers that, well, it went for quite a while, and there's groups that have a whole bunch of compositing going in it. So the first thing that I always do is I go in and I duplicate my layer.
Give you retouching layer.
Yeah, and this I had just taken off and just moved the entire leg over, just cut it out, which I will do, and I just moved it and reshaped it, and then it saved me a little bit of time by pushing it over and then just using a history, and in this point just taking away a little bit of edging rather than trying to be too artistic with it. So show how that was done.
Can I pause here for 1 second?
Certainly.
Rory wants to know if we can get a quick, before you start working on this, wants to know if we can get a quick look at your histogram.
The histogram right now is empty since I had closed the image.
No, the histogram on this original here.
The histogram on the original file, sure.
Okay, that is an unusual looking histogram because of that blown out background, I guess.
Yeah, my midtones are pretty steady. It's a little bit of peaking going on in the 3/4 tone and in the highlight all the way on the right, which is what you would expect for an image that the majority of it is pure white, and there really isn't anything that would be considered a shadow aside from the tire and what's going on here underneath her, underneath the seat and by the rear wheel of the car. Okay. So most of it would be this area here, which is what we're seeing.
That bright red on the motorcycle is also going to distort the channels. I mean, most of the model, I guess, would be considered mid-tone or low highlights.
Yeah, mid-tone, 3/4 tone on that, and then the rest would be a bit of a highlight, yes. So to go in there, all I did was, I will do that, is I just bumped up, took a section out, doesn't have to be anything accurate, and floated that up and went into liquify. And in here, when you liquify, and I'm sure everybody knows how to use liquify, and I have done this a little differently than I normally do. Normally I will duplicate the image and change the resolution on it just so that it moves a lot faster.
Right.
But for today's purposes, I'm just going to go in with a large brush and change this, and you will see that when I move, I'm not going straight down or straight left and right. You will find that what you want to do when you're resizing, when you have a lot of mechanical stuff around it that are straight lines, you want to stay and go in the direction of those lines if at all possible. Okay. And I don't really care about the arm, so right now we're just going to push this over.
So the motorcycle lines, if you were a bit haphazard on this, would serve as a cue that this had been chopped.
Yeah, and they're going to get bent a little bit. It's unfortunate, but it happens, but that's where we can go back in and we can repair that at any time. Just to quickly, one thing with the Wacom pen is the Wacom pen does not like liquify. It tends to hold on after the fact, and you get some really weird movements like that. So I'm going to switch over to my tablet mouse and then just bump into the
That goes a lot smoother for you than whenever I do it. I guess that's years of practice.
Well, yeah, I don't know what it is, Doug.
Could just be me.
A little bit of patience, I guess, just taking it small.
That would definitely be me.
But you get through this, it should go relatively quick, and slim her thigh down just a bit more here.
Now, have you done any sort of study of anatomy or anything like that? I know that a lot of the newspaper outrage stories or Photoshop disasters and like that are about impossible anatomy caused by liquefy and compositing and like that. And the stuff you're doing here looks very good and organic. Is this just something you've picked up over time, or have you gone out of your way to study about what leg muscles are supposed to look like and like that?
Yeah, well, I don't know what everybody's complaining about. I see those alien-looking women all the time when I'm in the streets of New York or walking around London and stuff. I mean, they're out there. But to answer the question, I have a background of acrylic painting and drawing,
Okay.
so I do have some. I never actually took an anatomy class, but I do suggest any retoucher, if they really want to get this down, is to buy the Gray's Anatomy book, and feel free to study it once in a while just to see what muscles and tendons and bones are going to do and what's impossible and what's not. It will help in the long run. There's been times when I've had to paint one shoulders, arms, hand. Well, thankfully never fingers, but hands, from scratch with nothing to start from, because the picture was out of crop,
Right.
out of frame. So I just had to make it up on the spot. And at this point, I usually save my mesh just in case. It always helps. You never know when you're gonna have to undo this, throw it away, and then hopefully get it back again. So, okay. Go back to my pen. So at this point, we have successfully narrowed the leg down. I know it's a little quick, sorry, a little slower.
It's amazing too.
Before and after. And what's nice now is for the spots here that we know should be straight lines, we're going to go back, we're going to select our history brush, and we're going to go change our history beginning point to where we had copied our layer. And if you want, when you copy your layer, if you want to make it more accessible quicker, you just go ahead and make a snapshot of that history set at that point instead of searching through. Right. So we're going to take the history brush, and I'm just going to go in here now and carefully put back the straight lines that I had removed. Keeping mindful eye of when the leg is going to start to pop back in.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, I see it there.
And which is fine. I'm just going to undo that and then carefully go around it. The less I have to do to recreate, the happier I am, and the faster the client will get their work. And it's easier to put the original stuff back in than try to recreate any of these gradients that are going on with this red. So we got
that label might be problematic. Would you ever tend to just clone out something like that if it ends up being problematic?
According to the write-up that we had, yes, the label is coming out.
Aha, okay. That works out well for you then.
It does. I would not have. I could have just done a little paste, copy and paste above, and then repositioned it, and that would have worked fine. So now we're still bringing back original. Oddly enough about this is they had done asked for the leg to be reshaped, And originally this was going to be cropped where the foot wasn't even going to show.
Mm-hmm.
And they changed their mind later, which really threw a wrench in my work. But I am going to faithfully stay with that.
Can I ask a question here? And I don't mean to be presumptuous or anything, but I'm just curious as to the choice of using the history brush here as opposed to just putting a layer mask on there and exposing the original layer.
Um, I don't like extra pixels hanging around.
Okay.
Alpha channels and layers with a minimal amount of pixels on them do use up resources. So I tend to, if I have an alpha channel, I will make a blank adjustment layer that's going to be used just to store that information. So I don't have to, I don't lose my mask, but it's there for quick retrieval.
Okay, so it's kind of a little bit of a file size conservation kind of thing. You know that it's already going to end up being quite large. You just don't want to make it any larger than it needs to be.
Correct. I'm just going to put some of these original wrinkles back. Try to blend these in just a little bit.
Do you ever need to toggle this layer to kind of visualize where you can pull from?
Yes, I do that, but I tend to wait. Sometimes a little too long, but I tend to wait and just go by what is happening with the visual on here, because I'm trying to keep in perspective the way I have reshaped that leg.
Now evidently some reshaping happened that I didn't see you paint. I mean, I guess that's from the size of the brush or something. I don't,
And where was that?
Well, like for example, the arm there. I don't remember you doing any liquefy on the arm.
When I pushed down her knee and leg,
okay. Yeah.
Inevitably it would go with it. And it looks like
damage.
I could push this a little bit more, but don't forget I'm also trying to separate the arm from the leg.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be there has to be some movement in there for me to work with. And it looks like it's right about where I had to give up. So we have a resizing of the leg and a lot of the original lines as what we could brought back in. Now at this point I'm going to, and if we had looked at my original cut here before someone says, we should just take it all out ahead of time. I was a lot closer here with the way I had cut out and before I reshaped. So you can see that there was not much left for me to actually remove if I needed to. I had my space bar down, thank you.
When you weren't doing a show, you had a little bit more time to...
There's time to rethink, and I probably did this 4 or 5 times over a great period of time before I was finally satisfied with what I had done. Particularly because I'd really, reshaping. She had pretty ugly knees as it is, and having to redo that and then redo other work on top of it at the same time, which just was not something I was going to look forward to. So zooming out to take a look at the how it works with the rest of the image.
Okay.
You see that her hip came up, which is, it should happen with the way the leg got shortened down, the slimmer down, and push the ankle forward here. Also, if with the people, somebody with a quick eye would have noticed that while I had been in there with Liquify open, I had done a little bit of reshaping in her hand and her forearm to also just
her natural forearm looks like you already liquefied it. She's got a skinny forearm.
She does have a skinny forearm, but everybody's got that
yeah.
ankle bump on their wrist, so I had to go slim it down, give away a little of the webbing, and then looks like I had done just a little, opened up her eye just a touch to reshape a touch right there to match the other eye. So then was the time to go in and remove stuff. Just start with the easy stuff. While I'm thinking about what I got to do over here, it was a matter of going in and making a blank layer above it, and in this case, because it was pretty solid, it's just a motorcycle, nothing
Yeah, I was
grand.
just getting ready to say, I mean, it seems to me a motorcycle would be pretty easy to clone on. Is that deceptively?
It it is deceptive because there are gradients happening within. In here, we got all kinds of reflections going on, which thankfully a lot of it I'm going to be taking out. But if I turn on a solar curve, which I have here, it makes a little more evident the differences that are happening within that motorcycle that I got to get rid of.
Okay, for the new viewers, I guess maybe we better give a quick review on your solar curves.
Sure. Solar curve is, all it is let's go over here to the adjustment layer. It's just different waveforms using curves, your curve palette, to bring out areas that would be hidden otherwise. So it'll push quarters and take out stuff. I mean, it could be anything in the world, and it just gives you, they call it a solar curve because it looks like, well, that.
Yeah.
It just looks like something's been,
But these were just experimental curves you made. There's no math involved here or anything like that.
This is pretty standard. This curve here is pretty close to the standard that everybody usually has somewhere in their arsenal somewhere, and this one is just a little closer to that standard. It's just a little wider. As you see, it opened it up a bit differently. And you can customize and make your own. I have something that's going to do something like this. There's a variety of what everything's going to show you something differently, so there is no right or wrong one, but you just got to make sure that you do check and double check with separate curves, separate solar curves from what you're using, because I can go in here now and remove most of these reflections, and looks fine in this solar curve, and then I turn off the solar curve and something looks wonky, and if I put on another one, it'll be glaringly obvious.
So I guess more important than having the right solar curve, although that is very important, but having many solar curves so you can toggle around, because it's just a visualization tool.
It's all it is. It's a visual thing. Nothing that you need to keep. You can just throw it away. And but if you make some and you like the ones that you make, by all means go into your adjustment panel and save what you have. Just pull down and say save curves preset. That way, when you reload Photoshop, or you want to travel somewhere, you can just go and grab those curves and bring them with you, and they'll never grow old. They float around with Photoshop. So
Chris would like to know if there's any solar curves used to reveal gradients in color, I guess to highlight them or exaggerate them.
To reveal gradients in color. I'm not sure, Chris, if I'm understanding your your question, but this green, I mean, if we're looking at the motorcycle, it's made up of various color gradients. We got pink going down the middle, and they're not man-made. If that's your question, any solar curve will show you differences in color, but you'll see that here you'll have where my brush is. It's a lighter pink going through, like, and then you got a shadow coming through. And let's see if I can find some place on the bike that's a little bit easier to see, like the way this is coming, the shape of this bell in the front. If I turn it on, you'll see this is all how it's going from a darker all the way over to a brighter pink, so we're
Okay.
looking at a cleaner color. And that's, I think, the closest I can come to answer
And you
your
can see that,
question.
like the line over there on the left, where it exaggerates it so much that it creates a boundary. That might be useful to someone.
It is because, you know, if you clone along this line, you're guaranteed to be reproducing exactly what was there. So, and it also makes it easy to take out so that you don't have, you know, you're cloning the right subject. So if I go back here now, and I'm just going to, you know, utilize that to just remove, and all I'm using is the clone tool. There really isn't any reason to use anything else for something as simple as this. As long as you got the solar curve, it's kind of hard to go wrong with it.
Guess they make it pretty obvious where you need to take your sample from.
It does, and it will look pretty like I'm stepping and repeating quite a bit, and it's going to happen. It's just the nature of the tool. But I got to tell you, I've been finding myself more and more utilizing a stamp tool for even beauty retouching.
Mm-hmm.
The more I delve into my solar curves and perfect ones that are useful, and it makes it a lot easier. You can go through, because as much as I love soft light, I'm not enamored with the amount of time it takes me to finish something.
Well, I tell you, it solves one problem that we occasionally have with the webinar, is it makes it very obvious where you're cloning and where you're sampling from. So I guess that's just an extension of the fact that they're a visualization tool. So it does the same thing in real life.
Yes. Boy,
Would you
wouldn't it be
ever
amazing?
use a blending mode on a solar curve? Does that help anything?
Um, I suppose you could. I don't know as I have ever done it, but let's see
Okay.
what goes on here. If we just go to multiply,
Whoa.
it's showing me stuff definitely that,
How'd your numbers
again,
come back? How did that work out?
well, because now it's got a see-through element to it, so
Ah, that's right. Yeah,
it's
it's
bringing
no
up
longer
everything
opaque.
below it.
So that would be, and it's still just a visualization tool. So.
Yes. Let's go back to normal, get rid of that stuff. And I'm just going to go quickly through and just remove this part. I'm going to turn that off now and see how much I've mucked it up.
Looks pretty good. Plus, it's not a. I mean, the motorcycle isn't the important part, really.
It's not the important, well, no, but it still needs to look good. And we can
Yeah.
see I have some lines coming through here that if I looked with that solar curve, it's not evident really.
Okay.
So I have to go in now and quickly bring that out and change that curve to something else. Just a good way of demonstrating what I was saying about some things are going to show you stuff and some not. So you can see a little bit of the lumpiness with this curve that was happening.
Since it's metal, could you just blur that, or would that look odd?
It is metal, but it still does have a texture. So
Okay.
very rarely will I blur anything.
Okay.
They're neat tools for getting special effects and stuff, but not too often. So then I've come over, obviously, and I got to get rid of this stuff here and work on returning her leg to a normal view. And the problem with this now and cloning, and what I was trying to avoid by bringing back the original, is making sure my lines are going to meet up and keep the visual strength that
Yeah.
was there of the original image. And anybody who uses the Wacom pen knows that that's not exactly the easiest of things to do. And I'm not going to copy up a section and move it down and
Well,
then
that was going
drop
to be the
it
first
in,
thing I was going to wonder.
because it's, you know, then I'm battling a lot of the stuff that you saw with the solar curve and that's the own blend lines that are happening automatically from the original. They're going to differ. So I'm not trying to change the lighting of anything that the photographer caught.
Now, would you ever like do a selection around her knee or something like that and then invert it to keep you from accidentally liquefying over that, or is your hand steadier than mine?
Liquefying? No, I would never.
No, no, I
I would
meant just,
never.
I mean, just while you're cloning there to keep you from accidentally cloning over, or not accidentally, but just to speed things up.
Yeah.
I don't know, or is that just getting too fancy?
Well, not necessarily fancy, but the problem with that is you're introducing a hard line that you're going to have to somehow soften up also.
Yeah.
And if it's too soft, it'll also be very noticeable. So I tend to not worry about that. And a lot of times, since I'm on a blank layer, it's all by itself. I'll even come in and just go right over it, just so not worry about it. And then I'll use that layer mask to bring back that portion of the knee
Oh, okay.
that was there. So this way I can just keep going. It makes it a little easier to make sure my lines are going to line up. And again, it's on its own layer, so it really doesn't matter.
I saw you did a quick redo there. You just noticed that it didn't quite match up, and you chose a new sample point.
Yeah, yeah, it's there is a texture there, a grain going on, and this vignette. There's a really weird vignette happening here between the top and the bottom, and luckily I noticed, and also I got a very soft brush on, and I'm noticing if you look, you get some of these soft edges going on when you clone or use the healing tool. It tends to blur things out a little bit on its own, so I try to avoid, like I said, anything that I'm going to have to go back in and fix when I really don't need to.
Getting rid of some hairs while you're there.
And why not?
Rona wants to know if you've ever written any of this stuff down for other people to.
Not yet. It will be, especially what I just got through talking about. It will be in my new book that will be coming out. Whoops, in the May.
Oh, really? So that's soon.
That's what I'm hoping.
Excellent.
And I'm trying to keep here. Also, you can see which direction the grain is going from that bike. And again, that is a real strong indicator. Even if you're not totally conscious of it, eventually when you're looking at this image when it's done, you'll notice it's going differently, just like when you take skin patch from somebody's forehead and put it underneath their cheek. It's just not appealing, and we notice it, and eventually
maybe even on a subconscious level.
Exactly.
I'd never really even considered a motorcycle might have grain. That's an interesting I guess that's maybe one of the things that might separate the pro retouchers from the people that are still learning.
Well, it's not like we really go out there and sample motorcycles and other stuff. It's just, it's
compared
really
to skin,
just,
they get kind of short shrift, yeah.
That's true. It's really more of an observational thing. I mean, if you didn't have that solar curve on it, would you have noticed? No, probably not. It just happens. I mean, you see grain, but it's real hard to see that there are lines going up and down in that, and it's not from the camera chip. It's actually from what the manufacturer's paint. The paint
it's from the motorcycle
did.
itself. It's not, yeah, it's not pixels.
It's the metal and stuff.
I was just wondering if working on a big old phase 1 file or whatever would make this more work or less work.
It would help and hurt at the same time, because with the addition of all those megapixels, you would get better vignetting, but you would also get a lot more detail, which in the end would mean a lot more work for a retoucher because of all that extra hair and wrinkles and pores.
Be a give and take
stuff.
situation. It might help here, hinder there, but it'd be just different, basically.
Exactly. So if you're still using your 6 megapixel camera, believe it or not, it's more than enough for a lot of work, especially ads that are only 8 by 10.
Yeah, as long as you're not going to crop it a lot or anything. Yeah.
Right.
Now are you going to composite in another elbow later on, or do you need to preserve that one?
I'm just doing a real quick thing here just for visualization at a later point. But no, I didn't have another elbow to do that with. I actually, the final image, I created the elbow from what was given to me from her own skin. So, because the elbows obviously on all the other shots were also touching, and made it real hard to utilize, especially also because they were a different size.
Now you're using you're painting on the layer mask here to bring that back? No, you're just literally
that's what I was doing. It is what I was doing, and I thought I had already made it while I was rambling on. So, but yeah, this would be on a mask, as you can see from the existing layers and stuff. That's what I had done. So eventually, I get to this point here, doing exactly what we see, and that's the layer mask that was from all that reshaping of the image of her leg and stuff.
Okay.
So, and you can see that the elbow is pretty rough, and the leg, the edging around it is very rough.
Oh, sharp, yeah.
And most of the label, I managed to keep a little bit of duplication on that piece of metal here, but all in all, it's not too fake looking. Most of the reflections, boy, I hate it when you zoom in like that and it leaps to another part of the screen. Apologize for that. Reflections are gone.
Now, in real life, how much time would you have had in on the image at this point?
Probably about 3 hours.
Okay.
Not too much.
More than
maybe even a little less, depending on the amount of caffeine I had in me.
The speed of the music you've got playing. Now, does that motorcycle tube, does it flare out in real life, or is that from your cloning and stuff?
Right here?
No, down about a foot down, around her shin. It's a little thicker there. Is that how the motorcycle really is, or is that a liquefy artifact?
That's how the motorcycle really was.
Okay, you can tell I'm not motorcycle savvy.
Well, I tell you, if I had owned a Ducati or something like this, I would. I don't know if I'd ever ride it, but it would be nice to look at.
You're afraid to take it out of the garage.
So, to get to that point, and then I go in and start doing cleanup on the leg to get rid of all these. It looks like she used to play field hockey possibly and got hit with a few too many
in all
sticks.
fairness, her leg is tensed there, and so I mean, yes, it is a little bit lumpy, but I think a lot of that might be actual tense muscles rather than just the way she,
So I'm going to go in.
Trying to be a little nice to her.
Oh, yeah.
Giving her the benefit of the doubt.
Sure. And I'm going to go in with the healing tool now and just remove what I can. I'm going to keep this. This is at 200% because I'm just going after the larger lumps.
She got goosebumps, or are those pores?
These are, it's a mixture of both. It's mostly pores. So.
Trying to be nice to her, but she does not have a future as a leg model.
No, not unless there's a rugby shot going. And I tell you, I've seen women play rugby, and they are animals on that field. So I don't know as I would want to go in there myself. This So I'm just gonna go here, and this was a mess. As you can see, a lot of the cloning that was done has smoothed out a lot of the texture on her leg, just because of the speed that had to be done with the image to get it done. To go through.
So what you just now turned on was your after all the healing brush, etc.
This is after quickly getting rid of some of the ugly stuff. Yes, it's by no means near the finish. It's just
what was was it primarily the healing brush? I'm thinking mostly about that goose flesh that she had. Was that?
No, it was because of the texture. It was mostly the stamp tool.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would have.
So then I went in.
I'm assuming that would have been time consuming.
It was time consuming, mostly because I couldn't figure out. This is the layer itself, and you'll see there's actually some painting going on with the paintbrush, just to fill in some color, which is again where you see some of the bald spots where we were not seeing any kind of texture, and also in the elbow. But after that, then I went and added another blank layer just to go back in and even out some of the shading and that weirdness that was going on.
Now,
yeah,
would this be a time for solar curves, or is that a different kind of situation?
I can turn the solar curve on. I don't want to look at it, but it's there.
I mean, would it be helpful or not?
There's really very few times when a solar curve is not
okay.
helpful. This particular one that I have on is a little dark for this. It's not really showing much, but we could definitely put on another one that would really reveal a lot of the stuff that did happen, and a lot of the I don't want to say sloppy, but a lot of this the way to build it up that I had to use to get it to that point would be shown, and how rough it really is.
But if you can't see it, I mean, without a solar curve.
Right, and it really wasn't going to be zoomed in too far. It wasn't going to be printed very large. You can see here taken out. I removed in the same way some tendon from her elbow and some other spots that were going on.
Now, have you already worked on her skin there? Because she has, compared to her legs anyway, she has wonderful upper arm skin.
Yeah, she was quite toned and quite. Her skin was probably one of the better skins that I've worked on with models when it comes to her face and her upper arms, but her hands and her legs have definitely been out in the elements a little too much.
I would swear that bicep and shoulder there was post retouching.
Nope, that's her original. This is all the stuff that has been changed up to this point. There's the before, and then here's the after.
Okay. One wants to know if you've got a very powerful computer that you use for this, and if you recommend people invest that way.
Well, I'll tell you what. I did this work on a dual G5 2 gigahertz machine. That was probably 2 years old at the time, with 4 gigs of RAM on it and maybe 2 terabytes of scratch disk. And what I'm showing,
machine 2-3 years ago.
It was at that point. It was a great machine. And right now that machine is sitting next to me, gathering dust, and it's just a server for my music and also a storage point for a lot of my clients' files. And what I'm showing. What I'm working on right now and showing you guys this is it's just an iMac. It's one of those 3.08 double quad Xeon chips.
Well, you say just an iMac, but it's one of the high-end newer iMacs.
It's not a. As a matter of fact, it's a year old for me. So it's nowhere near the nice ones they have out now, but it is a 27-inch iMac, and I've got only 6 gigs of RAM in this, and I jury-rigged 2 of those to go into it. It's really not supposed to be above 4, but it seems to be running all right for me. So you don't really need tremendous power. What you need is a good video card. You need a good scratch disk, because that's really where most of Photoshop's work takes place. The CPU feeding into that scratch disk. It's not as much RAM as one would believe, but
Chris
more
wants to know if you've got a
scratch disk.
dedicated drive for your scratch disk.
I do. I have a 1.5 terabyte drive dedicated just to the scratch disk.
Okay.
Nothing on it. So I hope that answered your question. Now I'll get pulled back in.
Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. It's a valid question at that point also. So I had then added in this portion of the dress, because as they wanted it to be, you know, they wanted to keep the sheerness.
You got that from
of the outfit.
another image?
This is from one of the other images. I will show you that here. Let me turn off these layers so you can see the progression of how it happened. And as you can see, I had turned in this image that I had masked. And this is set to a 20% opacity. So that's the image
okay.
that I had brought in and dropped after I got it placed where I wanted, turned in the opacity down.
Now you actually cut that fabric in the middle. That is not the natural end point of the fabric.
No, it's not. You're absolutely correct. And because of the way I needed it to come and flow down and take into account the wind, it needed to be that way. So now I added in a curve move, which I clipped to that layer. Believe it or not, it opened it up. Wait a minute, let me clarify this. Let me make sure my Photoshop settings have not changed. I like to keep mine as a CMYK, so it is. I pull down instead of pushing up to remove, as most people do. But so I went in, and even though I opened it up, it's pulling it. So I probably have it darkened it up. And then I added in another section of dress again here, which
you're keeping the sheerness of it by lowering the opacity.
Correct. Just keeping that shear down. I took out ahead of time all of the skin that would have been around it, and let me turn that back on. There we go. So that's just adding some more wrinkles into the image itself, giving the dress a little more of a lifelike situation, and then a curve to flatten that out. As you can see, it's opened up quite a bit. And because we're trying to make it look natural, we had to add in a little bit more, which I had gone. There's so many pieces in this. Added in another piece from another outfit. Let me see if I can isolate that for you. And that also has its opacity pulled down a little bit to a 40%. And then this has a couple of color layers, curves on it to flatten out, just to keep it looking more like what's going on in her lower back, etc., and for the flow coming out from under her arm.
Now, did you have to? Was this the result of a lot of trial and error, or did you pretty much?
This was a lot of trial and error, trying to find the right pieces, and this was a very frustrating project for me.
I can imagine.
And then I'll explain that why in a little bit. But taking off this curve that I have on, I brought in another entirely different image here now to get the natural thigh line
Oh,
of the
okay.
outfit and the wrinkles to line up with what I had put in. And then again, we're just going in and adding bits and pieces. This is another portion of that same thigh from that image, and all I did was just duplicate it up and place it on top of that. It lines up, and paint out some area to keep it a little transparent. And this is, I mean, the masks for this were all over the place. Just to let you guys see that, yeah, nobody's nobody's perfect. At this point, it was just a matter of getting something down on paper so that it looked decent. I mean, that's that entire mask. It's just that's just a curve move to fill in a little thing. And sometimes it's all it takes is these little tweaks, and it doesn't make sense a lot of times. But finally going in with another curve and darkening up that entire triangle area just to make it look semi-natural. So that's what we had added.
It ended up, I mean, it's looking very, did you have like a reference you were looking at, or was this completely
No.
blue sky out of your head?
This is just out of my head, yes.
That's remarkable.
So then they told me they didn't like it.
Oh, God.
So, which is fine. That, you know, you just go in and you save all of that stuff, and you go back and you start all over. And as you can see from my layer palette on the right, I've got each one of those images in there now. This one is for a certain part of the dress that's being held up.
Right, okay.
And you know, looking at this, you wonder, well, why can't I just have used that part of the dress that's over the thigh now and everything? That would have been nice. But it's not sheer enough, and that would have been really hard to get that sheerness to work for me. So we're putting in this just to get something up in the wind area, and then we're adding in coverage over that to hide her bottom and her lower back. They didn't want it to be too well, it was falling within the crop, so they didn't want it to be showing too much. So then we took a portion of that also and dropped it in, and then just balanced it, color balanced it with a curve, and then added in this chunk up there to make it a much fuller looking dress blown with the wind. This is just filling in with paint certain portions of that outfit, just to give it, you know, it was easier to paint out those marks than it was to touch them out.
Now I'm seeing a little piece of her thigh in the top of that.
Yes, you are. There's quite a bit of her thigh. So I'm just going to quickly go back to, in my history, to the original, just so we can see and keep in mind the direction that we're trying to get to and finish at. And this is telling me this is actually kind of noisy compared to some instances of what they were looking for. So at that point, we decided on it was a mixture in between the two that ended up working. It really is.
I hope this is a client that you're friendly with, because otherwise you'd be about ready to kill him.
Well, the photographer was somebody I had worked with quite extensively, but for the magazine this was going through, it was the first time working with that creative director. And if you are working with somebody that you have not worked with, you're better off giving them something that is nice looking, even if it's too far in what you've done, just because not only is it showing that you know what you're doing, but you're also going to be able to give them what they're looking for. So rather than being shortchanged on it when you give it back to them.
The audio is drifting a little bit, just so the audience knows.
Let me adjust my mic. How's that a little better?
No, it's the standard VoIP problem. Anybody that uses Skype has heard this every once in a while. Just every once in a while, for a few seconds, it starts sounding a little mechanical sounding. It'll come right back in a little bit. I just wanted to let everybody know that everybody's hearing it, so that they don't think it's their system acting up.
I see. All right. Let me go back in here and turn off some stuff that I don't need. Like this layer, I can take that back out.
And the numbers keep coming back and disappearing again.
The numbers should be there.
Okay.
So now we're back to where
if the numbers are supposed to be there, why did you clone them out?
It was a demonstration of what I had to do to get the reflections out and how that
a demonstration.
solar curve was going to help. But they kept the numbers were the only thing that they had kept when it came to anything with the reflections and lettering and labels and stuff like that. Eventually I would go in and take out this yellow, make that red. And
okay. Honestly, we really can't understand what you're saying right now, so I promise everybody that it'll come back in just a few seconds. Let's see here. I'll use this opportunity to go through the questions here. Rona wanted to know, whenever you said you were painting out on that dress, do you mean mask out? And I think, no, you actually painted using white and various other colors, yes?
that is correct. I'm actually doing paint on a blind layer. Pretty much same color samples around that area.
And let's see here, see if there's any more questions I can field while your audio is trying to stabilize. And unfortunately, they're all very specific in your area, not in anything I can do. I've already handled all the ones that I know the answer to. So let's try the audio now.
All right. So the next thing I was going to tackle, once I had gotten the edging done on this dress, to my satisfaction anyway, and at that point they decided they didn't want it as sheer as they thought, so it worked, having this portion put in. Next thing I had to do was hair. They want this hair to be filled out a little more flowing.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we went back to portions of the images that they had sent along, other CR2s that had some information, and it really turned out that only one of those really worked, because the brush that she was using to hold her hair back was always in the way. Just a little poor sight on what they were doing there. So we had gone in at there and added willy-nilly just white, since it's going against a white background. I didn't worry terribly too much about how the back of the hair blended at any point.
That would have been a nightmare otherwise.
It would have been, but I did worry about how it lined up with the rest of her hair coming back from her face.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as I had that fairly lined up, then I'll just draw with the mask, because this stuff's going to be a little blurry towards the back, and it didn't really matter what it was. This is the mask that I used to paint it out, and just added in colors. This is just a paint color.
You just painted that?
Yeah, that's just painted. It's got some I like to draw my hair as much as I can when I can.
Good at it. That was amazing.
But the way it turned out, it was getting a little too full for their liking. So I went back to the existing shots and color correcting chunks down again, trying to keep the flow of what was naturally happening. Again, I don't have to worry at this point about anything really blending in, just giving it rough masks so that I can see where I have to work with, and then just adding some more in up at the top. This eventually turned out to be too full looking for them. You know, it happens. And eventually I turned off some of these. And
can I pause you here? We're getting a ton of questions about your painted hair layer. I want to
sure.
know, can they see it by itself, and can you talk a little bit more about how you did that?
Yeah, how I did it is just sampling, again, sampling the hair color. Just get my paintbrush. I'm just going to draw it on. Let me see, I have something selected here. Just sample the color around. Painting hair is not as difficult as it normally might seem. As long as you're using the color variations that are around, you're going to pick up your brush, open up the palette. You're going to go to your shape dynamics, and all you're going to do is you're going to change to fade, and you're going to make this holding down your command key over your numbers. You're going to be able to pull this number out so that you have a decent looking fade. I'm going to turn off my other and noise at the moment, and then I'm going to add in this minimal diameter. See, the reason it's looking thick now is just because I have a rather large brush chosen. So if we go in and narrow this diameter down.
And you're painting in the middle of the hair, so you don't want that to taper to an absolute point like it would at the end of the hair.
Right, right. There's no reason for that. And then just going in now and just adjusting your numbers here to make sure that, there we go. You don't have to worry about size jitter or anything else like this. You're just going to go in and paint. My brush is still too big. Believe it or not, it's only a 4-pixel brush, but it is a little too big. Let's go down to 2. And all you're going to do is going to build up, starting with your darker layers.
Again, with the sampled hair color.
Sampled hair color, which is what I had done. You're just going to build up over time something that looks
hairy,
like you're flowing in over. Let's just go over here and I'll fill it in, turn off what is existing. So I'm going to take this sampled color here. I'm going to add a blank layer and just following what's going on. I'm going to rotate, holding down the R key just to give my hand a little more natural curve to follow. And make sure you vary your strokes, the colors of the strokes, so that you can have a natural build-up.
I guess as the cumulative effect, it gets more and more realistic.
Exactly. And the important thing is to keep the darker side down first. And it doesn't matter where you start with your hair when you're adding it, as long as you're covering up your start points, eventually it'll be fine.
And so you start with the dark and then go lighter?
Always start with dark and then follow lighter. And it's easy. It's important to remember which colors you're using. So at that point, you might want to start building up in your swatch palette your colors that you are using, so you can just keep going back and forth between those two. And I'm going to use a smaller brush. Now I'm down to a 1 pixel. I'm going to rotate this a little bit again to get to a natural. Come on. I accidentally hit the T key, so it's loading in fonts. All right, there we go. And make sure, you know,
rotate canvas feature.
It is a boon. And vary your opacity also. This is not one that you want to use pen pressure for too often. because it won't look.
Oh yeah, well, hair's the same opacity from beginning to end. Different ones might have different, but an
Right.
individual hair will be identical.
But you can still go in and use the opacity set to a certain one and fill in with different varying colors. Uh,
Okay.
Now these brushes are all too big.
Yeah, yeah.
It just doesn't look quite right.
But the color
But
looks good.
the color,
That's the most important part.
right? Color looks good, and then you're just going to go in and you're going to blur it slightly. So I blurred it minimal, and I'm just going to fade that back just a touch. This actually could be moved around and blended a little bit better. Now that I'm going to go in, I'm going to use my transform just to figure out a little bit better the angle that I like, and then go into warp and just bend it
Oh, okay.
just a touch to make it match a little more what was really trying to happen with the and this is very quick, so it's not going to look great, but it is exactly how I tend to do my
Right,
hair.
right. John wants to know why box blur.
You know, I thought I had chosen Gaussian, but I do use box blur a lot. It has a different edging on it. I feel it's a little softer transition between the what you're going to and from than what the Gaussian blur does. It's just a matter of taste.
Okay.
There are times when I'll use the shape blur also. It works very nice if you're using circles, and it works quite nice. So if I just go in there now and just change that a little bit and obviously get a little bit, now I'll go over that with another
Even as
layer
quick
with a
and dirty, that
sharper
still looks
edge.
pretty good.
I'll go over it with a sharper brush, which will bring back in some of that sharp original parts that going on. And that's it. And that takes a while, but
Yeah, but
it
hey,
gives
it
you a
looks
decent
good.
result.
Thank you.
All right. I think that's how it was in the final. I don't remember here. It's part of the dangers of turning layers off and on while you're doing this. So we had this, erase this because I know I don't need this. That was just a test. All right, so I believe that's where we ended up with the hair. I will open up the final file too, just to show. And then just because she obviously has a lot of light coming in from the left, the forehead's not working all that great. This hair really should not be visible. So just using white, just paint white around it and blurred it, and then made a mask to block what was going on with it.
Another benefit that the background gives you right there.
Yes, I can't tell you can't beat solid white. It's marvelous. And by the time I had all this done, and they were looking at what was happening with the dress and the leg, and making sure that shape was correct, because I wasn't about to go in there and do skin retouching before they did a finalize on all this stuff, because it would mean really undoing everything that had been done. So then I just went in with my normal soft light layer and painted out using colors to remove some of the blemishes that were in here. For those who do not use it, if you just hold down your Option key on your new layer and select soft light and fill with soft light with the neutral gray, and just hit OK, you'll get a blank gray layer set to soft light. And I have brushes that are already saved and created, clean up dark and clean up light, and those contain the colors that I normally use with a starting opacity and I'm going to go ahead and make one of those brushes now. I'm just going to make in the brush. I tend to start with a big brush just to see what I'm doing. I'll select a light area within her skin. Any kind of highlight that's not blown out is fine. And then I will adjust that color for saturation. Make sure it's not too saturated. Just lower it down a bit and flip that background foreground color and now select my dark. I'm going to go into the ear here because it's relatively still skin color, and I am going to go in and I'm also going to adjust the saturation for that and pull that down just a touch, not too much because it will tend to gray out. And I'm going to lower the brightness a little bit, so I'm within the same family, but it's not exactly the color there, which is fine. Then I tend to work with opacity when I use this and not flow, so I'm going to change my opacity to start out with to 25, and then I'm just going to bring my brush. I'm going to make this very soft, and then bring the size down to about, oh, I'd say 5 pixels or so. And now on that gray layer with the lighter color, I'm just going to start painting, and I could tell already that 25 is too much, and so I'm going to drop that to 10 and see how that's going to work, which is fine. I would rather I pushed a little harder on the brush than let Photoshop try to handle it at this point.
And people can watch the bottom of the toolbar over there. They can see you toggling your foreground, background, just hitting X over and over and over.
Now, I too tend to use my darken and lighten on the same layer. There are some people who prefer to make a separate layer for darken and for lighten, which is fine. When you get good and used to this technique, you probably will find that you won't be using 2 layers. It does tend to slow you down. It's no longer a matter of just switching your hitting the X key to swap out your foreground and background to get stuff done. It's a matter of going over to your layer palette and swapping that, and then going back to where you were and trying to do that, as well as changing your foreground color.
Now you're working very quickly and very intuitively here. I wonder if we can maybe put a break on it and maybe zoom in a little closer than you normally would to work on this, and maybe do one little piece in slow motion so we can get an idea of what you're looking at and what the decisions that you're making.
I can do that. And right now, actually, I am quite a bit further in than I normally am. This is 210%. I tend to work at certainly no greater than 100%, and usually at 66.7, and then from there down. I'm going to undo everything I have on here, and just by going and filling this with 50% gray normal, and go back to what we had. And all I'm doing here is I'm selecting, this is blotchy right here around her nose, the bridge of her nose coming down. And all I'm going to do is even out this color using the lighter color that I had chosen to lighten the darker areas. And then I'm going to darken up the lighter areas and just go back and forth between the two until I have something that's relatively smooth, but still retains the texture of the image.
Now, since her head in the final image would be, what, about the size of a quarter or 50-cent piece or something like that, would you be spending as much time on this as you would a facial close-up, or do you just do enough to pass?
I spend the same amount of time on it because you never know when the image will be picked up at a later time for a larger publication or billboard or something.
Do you remember how much time the B&D here took you on the original?
I'd say about 4 hours.
Okay.
Roughly, just for the face and arm and hand and probably another 2.5 hours for the leg.
Fabio wants to know if you ever use the solar curves while you're doing this burn and dodge.
Not really. It is tough to see at times, and when I do run into that issue, I will go in and I make a black and white gradient map. So I just make sure my colors are set to black and white, and just coming down to very bottom of your adjustment selection in your layer panel. Select gradient map, and it's going to make a black and white overlay. I don't know why it reversed, but actually I do know why. It's the way mine was set up. So I'm going to select black and white in the gradient here and just tell it OK. And at this point, what I'm looking at is I'm getting rid of the color, because to me color is a big distraction when you're getting rid of modeling on a model. It's not a color issue when that happens 90% of the time. It's more of a density and luminosity issue. So once you take out that color factor, it's a little easier to see what's going on.
Simplifies it a bit.
Correct. And then I'm just going to go in and, again, on that gray layer, just paint black and white to fill in.
And did you do this on our hands and elbows and knees and everything?
I did.
That's why it took so long.
Yeah, this is the one of the layers from the image. This is her head, hand, and her arm coming down, and then this is the leg. This is her thigh coming down to her ankle and calf.
The leg took a while.
And then on top of that was added. Let's see what this. It didn't go on. There we go. Let's find out where that was. It looks like it was probably down by her legs. Yeah, we added on a bunch more into the knee area under here, just to smooth that out and to show you what those looked like. It's just opening up the shadows in those areas.
Now, on that little dimple on the inside of her knee, did you you made your brush bigger, or you just used many passes of that little tiny brush?
For this area right here?
Yeah. I noticed it looked really smooth on that layer, so I didn't know if you used a much larger brush.
Yep. Well, one of the nice things about having that gray on the layer is that you can do color moves on it. You could use all your color correction tools. So all it was a curve. I'm going to make that all over here. Let's just quickly do that. It was a curve that I had set, a rough selection around here. Just softened that. And using a regular Command M to bring up your curves, just removing out density.
So that's a curve on a gray layer, not a curve on the photo.
Correct. That's all it is, and this allows me. Why I use it like this, it's because I don't like guesswork too much, and when I do guesswork, it takes a little too much out of matching stuff, and I've had a lot of pre-press experience. It still just gives me a headache. I'm going from a known point. I have a layer that's filled with 50% gray.
Right.
So all I'm moving is everything from 50% gray, and I'm letting Photoshop handle the math for how it's going to handle shadows and highlights. So there's less chance of me building in saturation or contrast where I don't want any if I went with a normal curve. So that's all that was there. That's why you saw a big blotch that's relatively smooth.
Excellent.
On the original layer here.
Now, do you have any way to show us the whole image with your dodging and burning toggled on and off?
Yep. Yeah, let me make sure I got the correct layers here. I'm just going to group those and zoom in, and wherever you want to start with that, we'll go to 100%. This is turning off and turning back on.
Oh, so you did a little bit on the dress there too.
Yeah, you can use the soft light dodging burn anywhere, and it really comes in handy on fabrics, um, cars.
I was just getting ready to ask if you did it on the motorcycle at all.
I in this instance, I don't believe I did, but in cars that I have done, um, it works fantastically because again, you got all those areas that have reflections, and sometimes making a selection out of it, it just really tends to give you edges and stuff. So
Now,
yeah,
now
yes.
you actually you did some cheekbone reshaping using that.
That's just the lighting. Yeah, I just changed the lighting with the soft light so that it was nothing bouncing back off of the from the earring.
It always amazes me the amount of difference just that dodge and burn layer can make.
It definitely is time consuming, but it's always worth it. You will never find anybody, as far as I've ever found, any client asking what the heck, you know. Yeah, it took me a little more time, but they're always happy with the way it comes out. So at that
Now,
point,
Rory
yes, go ahead.
noticed that you did not get any notes on her leg pores or that goose flesh or whatever. Did they just assume that since you're a professional retoucher, you know to take that out?
Um, yeah, I would say that was an assumption on their part. Normally, I won't get any images unless there's some kind of skin involved, since that
See,
is
you're the skin
what
guy.
I'm known for, is natural skin. So they just expected that to be the the minimum amount of what they're going to get is perfect skin. Whether they ask for it or not, it's going
Sure.
to be done. Then we went in and we started to do color moves because she's a little flat overall. Uh, I mean, generally it's a good balance, but we went in and we darkened up the shadows using a curve. Minor move, and it moved quite a bit for such a small tweaking. And added another curve in just to give it some contrast the other way around and opening up all the way up through its 3/4 tones. And if we turn off the shadow, we can still see the difference it makes.
Okay.
Instead of trying to do it all in one curve and getting too much of a burn or broken edges or saturation, it's always better to do it in a couple more. And then we just added in a few tweaks to even out and make it more of a warmer,
Yeah, I got a little warmer there. Now,
warmer image.
do any of those layers have? I mean, they all have masks, but did you paint on any of the masks?
Nope, these are all just the default layer
Okay.
mask that's created with making the layer itself.
Did you select? Did you select a certain area to concentrate on, or were you just kind of looking at the overall image when you made those?
Its overall image, I knew that, you know, looking at the image, you'll know what is shadow and what's not. And the model is, of course, the feature point for the article, since it is beauty. So you focus more on her shadows rather than the motorcycle's shadows. And we just tweaked it from that standpoint. So it was just a normal thing to go in and make sure that looked right, regardless of how plugged up around the back wheel or her shoe or the blacks in the front of the motorcycle got. And then we know we want to continue to have that light coming from the left stronger and blown out more, which if you look at the flesh, it really shapes the flesh a lot more, giving that contrast and glowy look that so many people want. And then just adding the color in just is like icing on the cake.
Rocky wants to know if you can put a color sampler on a skin highlight and go through those.
Sure. Oop. Ah, wrong key.
So we'll look at your info palette up there. It's kind of small for on the
I'm
screen
going to
here.
turn everything off. Guys, I can see the info is right now it's a 235-226-219. I don't know if you want me to go into CMYK breakdown or not. depending on what you guys understand most. But then we do
Nobody's saying anything, so.
Good. So we push on the shadow move, and it tweaks a percentage, not very much in that area. And now we're going to go in and open up the quarters all the way through. And it moves a bit, but it's still within holding area for a press. It's not anywhere near that 255 that's going to hurt it. A little bit over 240 that I normally like to go. But going back in and adding the color, adjusting the color is going to fix that.
Okay, what on that final one, can you convert your info palette up there to the CMYK numbers just so we can at least give them that final number in CMYK? It's actually darker than I expected.
It should have, ideally, for some purists, some cyan in that highlight, but there isn't anything.
Okay.
When I convert it, it might pop in. And in the going to the forehead, we still are holding quite a bit of dot, pretty darn close to the same balance.
Yeah, a little bit of the Y difference.
So and when on press, that 1% yellow is negligible. I mean, it could be 10% different, and it's almost negligible at that point.
Okay, you could see it on the screen, but whenever it came down to the ink, you might not notice it.
Right. So, and then moved in. They were okaying so far what they saw, and they wanted to change the color of the ankle, balance it with the rest of the image. So, again, just push there. We have a group mask, really rough around that area, and we add a curve in on top of a selective color where we just tweaked the reds, which is one reason why we didn't have to worry about the mask. And then again, a little more accurate for areas using the curve and a mask on its own to just balance that over to the yellowish color that was there for the rest of the leg. And they wanted to adjust lipstick. Too far. And that was just done in a move. They just wanted it to warm up like the rest of the image had, and it's just a regular painted in mask.
Now, did they provide you with the lipstick itself for you to match the color, or did you just eyeball?
No, all they said was go for the motorcycle.
Okay.
And the stick itself actually is pretty close to the motorcycle, and just taking into account other lighting, we just tweaked it up a little bit in the blue color. To be slightly different, it's going to go on different. Lipstick never looks the same on lips as it does on the actual product, which never ceases to amaze me. So, and then we went in and added in this little bit of selective color for her fingernail. Of all things, it's black. Whoops, it's black in itself. Come on. There you go. Just to tweak it, it was a little, get rid of that red edge that's happening because of the camera shot. And then tweaked it again a little bit overall with a selective color move, just to take out some of the contaminant. And that would have been some black and cyan, and plussing up some magenta. And the final was just a move here to get that to a red color from that yellow square. And I'm pretty sure I've left something turned off somewhere here. But this is pretty much how the final image ended up.
Now, how many, you mentioned that they liked it to this point, but they wanted this change, they wanted that. How many iterations do you give them?
I normally do first and second show. And even it's very rare for even a second showing to happen. In this instance, because of the compositing that was involved, it went 3 or 4 times before we settled on a look. And it was mostly because of the sheerness of the dress and what happened. That second image that I showed when we first started with the second round before and after, and would go back and forth too. They remarked on little less hair added in and less dress, sheerness of dress.
So you would what? You would just email them a JPEG?
That's really all I do.
Okay.
I just send off JPEGs to the photographer and the creative client, and that's it. And they'll look at it and mark it up. And lately, I use some Adobe software to preview on screen, so we eliminate the JPEG, and this way they can look at it and live as I mark it up, and they can mark it up at the same time.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Saves a little time.
It's not Captivate. I can't remember. It's one of the Acrobat tools.
Yeah, Acrobat. It's a Connect.
Connect. That's what it's. And you get in CS4 you get a free like up to like 6 people, I think it is, can.
Yep. It's simple to use. You just come under File, and say share my screen, and that will automatically launch their service. And then you can email.
It's very much like a webinar, only for 6 people.
Exactly. And if you're lucky, you can have audio with that too.
Well, yeah. Of course, you're dealing with corporate a situation like that, so they more than likely are going to have good resources. But hobbyists like that might not necessarily have that luxury.
True. I'm going to open up the higher res complete file so we can see exactly what they finally went with.
Christian wants to know what is in the folder Fix Noise Shadow.
That is nose shadow. See, I knew I had something turned off.
Ah, see, well, we got a bunch of attentive guys here.
Thank you for that, Christian. I had actually said to myself, I got to go over this now, and I still forgot completely what it was. They didn't like the angle and the harshness of the shadow, so we went in and took it out completely, and then reconstructed it down to blend in, so her nose was rounder and not quite so aquiline.
Can we see your masks there?
Yeah, top mask, middle mask, and the first mask that really took off a lot of the weight itself. And a lot of people are looking at these probably going, those are just drawn masks. They're not any of my specialty masks that I normally use and stuff. Just because it was too, everything had to be done real fast. There. Right.
So it's what you did an overall move and then masked it in, or you did the masks and then did the move?
I'll do the mask and then do the move through it. Occasionally I'll do an overall and then mask it out. Sometimes it just makes sense to do it that way. But in this case, I knew what I wanted. I knew what I had to get done, so I just drew out that portion with a paintbrush.
That is a good catch, and that was an important part too. That actually has a pretty large. Well, anything on the face is going to have a disproportionate effect on the final look. People are drawn to the faces.
It's amazing how much that does affect anything, even clothing lines. If you're doing fashion, the first place they still look is at the people's face, and if it doesn't look good, they usually don't look at the clothing either. Sad but true.
Well, I guess they just, but it still has to look good, otherwise it's going to distract from it. So why don't we, can you toggle back and forth between your the real image and this one, so we can see any slight, obviously there's going to be a bunch of differences, but can we see any important differences?
This is the final image that shipped. This is the image I just did that's obviously got added stuff in, but you can see how this is the shipped image. We have more sheerness in the dress.
Okay, yeah.
And we have adjusted the hair, the mask on the hair. It looks like I left the mask off. It's not as fuzzy in the one we just. Whoa!
Runaway zone
drives me nuts. All right, let's just line that up. So here's the finished image, and here's the one that shipped. That we were just working on. So you can see where I have the mask lift off here.
Okay. And what's responsible for that additional sheerness in the dress? Is that another mask?
That would be a mask, and let me see if I could find that. Oops. Let's try in here. Supposed to jump to it. Come on. Dress editions. The trouble with having gazillion layers
Yeah.
in an image here, so that's probably a mask up further.
Now, this is your final, or this is today's work version?
This is the final.
See, if you would have named your layers.
You know what? It's the original image. There's a little bit of a mask move on this group too here, but it's an overall thing. So the overall contrast changed the sheerness, but it looks like I had said before that they thought the dress was a little too full.
Right.
So we just ended up changing the angle here a little bit on her bottom, and then just adding in this part here. So we left with the original flowing dress. It got too busy. There's a problem. You know, we added in this line here just to make it look like it's coming from all around her body and not just her left side. But there is a problem when you do too much compositing and stuff. It can get too busy looking, and it definitely draws away.
Sure.
From what they're trying to achieve, and that's what happened when I added in as much hair as I had. I mean, she was really
Get bushy.
Yeah, it looked like she had extensions added in by the time I got done with her, and it was a little too much. It looked great, and you know, for another shot or another subject, it might have worked fine.
Now, whenever you work with art directors, is it and you know this you know iteration business or whatever, and like you spend forever working on that little piece of dress, and then they say no, we don't like it or whatever. Is it I mean, obviously, they need it so that they get what they want. But as far as your point of view, is having this pair of relatively objective or at least different eyes looking at it, is that helpful to you? I mean, do you tend to agree with them, or is it just purely and simply a case of tastes? I mean, do you ever get notes back and you say, you're right, and that does need to be such and so and so, and then that's a piece of information that you have that you can use on future images.
The majority of times, I think most will agree that it's more of an annoyance when you get stuff like that from creative directors.
Thank you for speaking honestly about that. Yeah,
And I'll have to tell you, if they do it up front before the image is started, it's a benefit. It's very helpful. It gives you some place to start towards. But after you've been working on something for 15 hours and the image has dramatically changed, and now all of a sudden they want to go back several iterations to something that you had and still keep what you have now, it's very problematic. It's not as a matter of just turning off this or turning that off. You know, when you got masks involved, it really can hurt how it happens, and you could add on a few hours. So yeah, you wish they wouldn't talk.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say, well, you know, what happens if you've got however many hours you've already estimated on this, and they say, by the way, we want her to be in a VW Bug instead of on a Ducati or whatever. I mean, do you just renegotiate, or do you just suck it up and do it, or what happens there?
It's all billable.
Okay.
That's known as AA, author's alterations. So it's all billable.
So but if they depart too terribly far from their initial plan.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And it does come down to answer the final part of your question. It really doesn't matter what I like or not. It's you know, it's theirs, and all art is subjective, but in the end, when it comes to doing an ad or beauty ad or something like that, it's what they want is what's going to happen.
Now, in your your particular area, do you tend to be working more with art directors, or do you work with people in all sorts of different job, the photographer themselves, or is it, like I say, mostly art directors?
Yeah, when I was in New York, I worked quite closely with the photographers. I would actually be on the set with the shoot, um, giving any input I could for lighting and stuff that they would want. And of course, I wouldn't just invite myself; they invited me. But it was nice that they did so, and it really did help because it also helps you with figuring out retouching ways to do the retouching that you have to be done, and it helps them because they learn what angles work, what angles don't, which they should know, but for lighting purposes, you never know. And they are also learning at the same time what can and cannot be done with Photoshop. There's still that myth out there that, well, don't worry about it. We'll get it post-production. Photoshop can
Yeah.
do anything. It's just not true. Out here, where I'm not in New York anymore, I deal more with creative directors, art directors, than I do photographers themselves.
Now, do you find that art directors run the gamut like any business middle management person would, from genius to idiot, or do they tend to be pretty good because they've earned their position?
Um, I have, quite honestly, um, run into a few that were remarkably talented, and it was a pleasure to work with these people. They would genuinely knew what they had been doing. They were previously retouchers, but they also had an art background, and they've been in the ad agency for quite a while, so it helped. And I would have to say those 60% fall in the latter category, and really, really at odds with their own photographers for that
Okay, yeah.
matter.
I can hardly recommend everyone rent a movie called The September Issue. I just watched it a couple of nights ago,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's a documentary about the making of the September 2007 Vogue edition, which was the biggest, thickest Vogue they ever did. And it is a documentary, and they follow it from idea to completion, and it is fascinating. And you hear about from the photographers. The only mention of retouching took place over the telephone, but it's still, you can get a real good idea as to what life is like in the places that would utilize someone like Chris's services. As a matter of fact, I saw an image there. I could have sworn I saw on your site. I got to check it. You didn't work on that particular image or that particular magazine, did you, or that particular issue?
I don't know. I don't remember anything
September
beyond the last 5
2007.
minutes.
I saw an image on there that I know I've seen one of my retouchers do, but I don't remember which one. And I know that you've done work for them. So anyway, watch that movie. Got an interesting question. We were talking about photographers, and they wanted to know if if it would have helped you to have had a relatively flat ambient light version of this image whenever you were making your decisions like that, rather than this full blown out exposure look here.
Well, yes and no. As I say, when I process, I tend to make it flat looking, like the original layer is here, and I'll even flatten it out even more than is probably necessary. This one I didn't go quite as far as I usually do. But yeah, it does help because it makes any kind of soft light or dodge and burn, any kind of dodge and burn for that matter, regardless of whether you use curves or a brush or the dodge and burn tools, it makes it easier because you don't have the hard lines that are difficult to get rid of. The
Mm-hmm.
pores are softer and they blend a little easier, so it makes your job a lot easier to flatter the images exposed. However, at that point, you have to take into consideration, are you going to be able to color correct it to the final destination that it's going to be? There have been times when I've gone in and I've processed something out flat and really shot myself in the foot because 2 days later, after all the retouching's done and stuff, I can't get something
Can't
pushed
pop
as
it
far
back
as I
up.
need
Yeah.
to.
Actually, I think they were thinking more along the lines of like a reference image or something.
Mm,
If you had an exposure without all the lighting effects and everything, just so you could see how everything really looked or whatever.
If that's what I meant, no, I don't think so.
Okay.
I have a hard time visualizing, so I like to see what it's supposed to be close
I
to at the end.
understand. Let's see here. Rona wants to know why you do your burning and dodging on a soft light layer. I assume by that she means not an overlay or not any one of the other modes.
Sure. Certainly you can use overlay um, or hard light. It's really a matter of taste, how trustful you are of your own hand pressure on the pen. Overlay, hard light, and soft light are just contrast blend modes, with each one successively harder than the others. Overlay gives a nice balance between the two, and soft light is a gentler approach to this contrast, and you have a far more control because you have to work harder. Hard light, on the other hand, is a drastic hit. It's extremely hard to control, and you will frequently be surprised at what comes off out of your pen, and you won't be too happy unless you've trained yourself to accept that harshness and adjusted for it with your hands and the Wacom tablet.
Let's see here. Gilda wants to know how many total hours did this one project end up taking you? Or I guess,
This
I guess more appropriately is how many total hours were you able to build them for?
I built them for about 18 hours on this.
And then how many did it really take?
18 hours.
Oh,
No, yeah, yeah. It took 18 hours.
and this is an interesting question also from Gilda. I have no idea if you have any way of knowing about this or not, but it's a fascinating question. It wants to know if you had any idea what the total overall overarching budget was for this entire photo shoot. Your services,
Yeah.
the photographer's insurance. Is there any way you would have an idea, any way of knowing anything like that?
Um, I'd love to say yes, but I really do not know uh, what the final thing was for total cost for everybody. No clue.
I will mention that they do mention some number figures in the September issue movie I was talking about, and two of the shoots that they mentioned, one was 50,000 and the other was 100,000. Of course, that's
Yeah.
Vogue, so I don't know how their budget is compared to this particular situation here.
Right, and you have to keep in mind that's probably for the entire magazine too, and not this shoot. I mean, a lot of photographers really don't make that much. They'll be in the studio for 8 hours one day to get one shot, and they might make $300 on it. And I'm talking about really well-known photographers. There's just times when there is no big budget on stuff, and the retouchers actually get paid more than the photographers. And there's times when it's the other way around. They might spend $10,000 a day on the photographer and tell me you can do this as long as you do it for $300 the entire image. You just don't know how it pans out.
Let's see, Jose wants to know if you belong to any organizations, or I guess he just basically wants to know how you get work. What's your networking technique that allows you to get calls to do jobs like this?
Word of mouth.
That's all it boils down. There's no central
That's all I've ever
clearinghouse,
done.
no agents or anything like that.
No, there is one retouching agent that I know of in the country, and she's based out of California. I don't have an agent. I took out an ad once in some magazine. I don't recall what it was, and I never got a call from it. But all my work and everything I've been doing has been from word of mouth, which really is the best way you can get it, anyways, because anybody else you don't really want to know usually, because you have no idea how they pay or work. But if someone recommended you to somebody, then it's usually a pretty decent client, and it's somebody that you're going to want to work with.
So you don't ever have to go out and beat the asphalt and take your
No.
portfolio around it. I mean, I'm assuming that's how you started, though.
Uh, no. I've
Really?
been very, very lucky in my career in that when I worked for a pre-press house in Connecticut also many years ago, I got out of that by somebody from New York calling me up and saying, "Hey, you want a job?" And it's like, "Well, you're in New York, I'm in Connecticut." I said, "How did you hear about me anyway? I'm not advertising. I didn't have any job applications out or anything, but somehow through word of mouth, they did that, and that's how I've gotten every job since. It's just
Wow.
been somebody has
Well, I
seen
mean,
my
I guess
work or
it's
heard about
talent.
it."
Talent will out. If you're good, people want good, and they find good. They go out and seek it and invite them in.
Exactly. Exactly. That's why you want, when you asked to do for a thumb-sized shot of her to a regular size, do I put in the same amount of work? And yeah, that's why I always do the same amount of work to
Very
every
good point.
image.
Excellent point. So that's how you keep the word of mouth coming.
Yes. Yeah, because
Excellent.
it might not be an important job to you, but to your client, it's their most important job at the moment. And it's, if you make it look good and you make them look good, then that's really what's going to make them come back to you.
Vadim wants to know what's the longest you ever spent on an image?
On one image, I'd have to say it was close to 30, 35 hours on one image.
Wow.
It
Do
was
you
a,
remember?
it was a, huh?
Well, I was just going to say, what was it?
It was a beauty image. It was a real ball buster on what I had to get done with it. And it also involved a lot of flip-flopping on final direction.
Ah, so that wasn't
Uh,
necessarily just that she looked horrible to begin with, but there was a lot of iterations like what we were talking about earlier.
Correct. And believe it or not, I think the images that I have the most work with are shots of the prettier girls and the higher end cameras. So you get more hair showing, you get more all everything shows, and the models who make it, that's their living. They get paid 10,000 a shoot or something. They're the ones I have to spend the most amount of time on just because.
Poor you.
Yeah, well, after a while, one pour looks like another.
Let's see here. I'm going to, I mean, there's a gazillion questions. There's always a bunch that I'm not able to get to, and I apologize for that, but I am going to browse through here, getting a little bit down to the wire here, and let's see here. I tell you what, Diane asks a question, and she asks it in a nice, vague way, so that we're not getting too specific. She wants to know what is not your particular situation, but in general, what is the hourly wage range for retouchers generally in the field? Chris?
Um,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I can honestly, yeah, sorry, this old age nap. No, I can honestly say that I really don't know.
Okay.
I don't fish around, and I
I,
have
I
what
always
I
I always
feel.
get a lot of questions, people saying, how much does he charge and how much did she get paid for this and whatever, and just out of tact, I got to skip those. But this one here seemed vague and general enough that I was hoping that maybe we could get just a little bit of a window into what's going on there.
Yeah, it all depends on the retouching being done too. It depending if it's sort of in the medical industry, it's a lot less than beauty industry, a lot less than fashion. It all depends on what field you're actually in. So,
It's funny. Our first shows always began with me asking your you to give us the story of how you got into retouching, and we did that so many times that I started skipping that. And now I'm getting a bunch of questions about how did you get into retouching, and how did you move from New York to wherever you're at now, et cetera, so forth and so on. You feel like going through the story again?
sure, if they want to know,
It'll
there's
it'll
there's a
it'll it'll kill the last couple of minutes of showtime here.
yeah. Well, there's it's just another way, I guess, of showing that there's anybody can make it if I did, that's for sure. I got into it completely by accident. I was back in the early to mid 80s. I was unemployed and fresh out of college, had no clue as to what I wanted to do in life, and a friend of mine snuck into a place and showed me how to build up proofs by hand with powders. And I came in the next day, applied for the job, told them I had been doing it for years, and proceeded to proceeded to botch the demonstration up completely as to what I knew, but they hired me anyway for whatever reason. And then I
Back to
was
that
very
Tarantino luck again.
yeah, I was just pretty observant as to what was going on around me, and I learned how to wet etch, to do all this stuff by hand using chemicals, and then dry etching
This is
when
all Stone Age technology stuff that's
oh
like the
yeah, back
buggy
when
whips.
films, it was insane, but you know, it all learning in the dark room and stuff all helped for what when Photoshop eventually came out, because I refused to go over to the proprietary systems.
Hmm.
And just because of, you know, they were proprietary and I just, you know, don't know how and didn't know how to use a computer or a PC. I'm fine on a Mac. And once I saw that it was Photoshop, it was on a Mac, I knew that it was just a limited amount of time left before what I did for a living was gone. And sure enough, there's nobody that does that anymore. And taught myself Photoshop in a hurry, and that was it. Phone calls started coming in. After a couple of years from Adobe and Macromedia and Corel and Meta Creations all got in touch with me, and we worked. I worked on all their beta stuff for them, helped them. I helped Apple nail down the color management specs and stuff with Brunner for the Brunner bars and reproduction systems, and then all of a sudden getting calls in from New York or wherever, hey, come on and work for us, or hey, do this. So
Again,
there was a
talent will
tremendous,
out. People knew you, people saw you were good.
yeah, but it was just a matter of being at the right time in the right place, and you know, it just happened that at that point I happened to know what was going on, and it helped. You know, it's just luck, a lot of luck.
Which is not exactly the most encouraging thing we could tell the audience here, but you know, it was luck fueled by a lot of talent and a lot of hard work. I mean, what do they say? Luck favors the prepared.
Exactly. Yeah, there was definitely a lot of hard work. I won't lie about that. My hours, weekly hours, were always, until in the last couple of years, were always easily into the 100-hour weeks, and that would be 50 weeks in a row. You know, so it definitely was no ability to slack off or to put my guard down, and it was just a lot of time.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. See, are we looking here at the final, or is this the final we did today?
This is the final that shipped out to the
Okay,
client.
well, let's look at the one we've been staring at this for a little while. Let's move over to today's, and then maybe you could just toggle the base layer and you know, before and after just a couple times slowly, so we can just
All
see what was done today.
Here's the base layer, and here's.
Even with the limited amount of time you had today, that still looks really good.
It's all right.
Well, you're biased.
I am biased. It's just this. Oh, I should put my glasses on. It might help. Much better.
You've been doing this whole thing nearsighted? Excellent. Now, is there looking at this? Is there anything that's just screaming out to you that you wish you had a little bit more time? I mean, that you would, you know, obviously you would have changed a lot if it was really for production. But is there anything right now? What's the number one thing that's bugging you?
Her on this image here, her face is too pink. The dress is too heavy, including down here around her thigh. That outfit is that portion of the outfit is a different balance, so I'd balance it more towards what was going up here with this translucent part. I really liked detail in the shadows, so I would probably open up on the motorcycle even though it's not necessary, and I would try to get more detail here in the shadow of her hair behind her ear. I try to get rid of this highlight that's traveling down her arm, along the shadow of her arm. I'd just get rid of that saturation that's there. That just bugs me. Other than that, probably not much.
I don't take any offense at this or whatever, but the first thing that catches my eye when I look at this is her leg looks a little slick. or I mean, never mind. I'm just looks a little what is it, homogeneous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can understand. I can see where you see that. True, especially when you're comparing it to the rest of her.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it could go a little further, bringing out the highlight a little further down the shin and possibly along the back of her calf, or
Although
just plussing up the
it's
shadow.
really a low blow for me to say anything at all about this that you did, you know, in this limited amount of time. I'm kind of sorry I mentioned it already.
Yeah.
Okay, well that winds it up for today's show. Uh, I think this went really well. This was a departure from some of the other shows you've done, and a very good direction, I think. And the before and after is quite dramatic. Let's see. I want to thank everybody for showing up. Yeah, the occasional little toggle there would be appreciated. That's great. Remind everybody to check out the YouTube thread over in the forums. While you're there, stop by this show's thread and tell us what you thought. Pro, con, if you've got any more questions, Chris is, at least among our presenters, one of our more prolific forum posters, so feel free to ask any questions there. And of course, we're always looking for ideas for future shows with Chris. So let us know if there's anything that you'd like to see Chris work on that he hasn't done in one of the previous shows. And I guess that pretty much does it today. How do you think it went, Chris?
I think it went very well. Thank you guys for listening. Some good questions this time around. That was great.
Really good questions. Okay, well, I guess I'll just tell everybody that I'll see them in the forums. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye, Chris.
Bye.